Welcome this morning to another of our webinars in our enterprise series. This morning, we're going to be talking about the 4-day working week and what that could mean for your business. And that certainly sounds interesting to me. My name's Esther Carden. I'm a partner at Moore Kingston Smith, and I'm going to be hosting this morning. Moore Kingston Smith is a UK top 15 audit, tax and advisory firm. We work with businesses across lots of different sectors, as well as not-for-profit and private client. We're also part of More Global, which is an international network with presence in over 100 countries. So the world's largest trial of the 4-day working week ended in the last week of February, and out of the 61 companies in the 6-month trial, 56 have extended, and of those 18 have made it permanent, which I think is really interesting. So I'm looking forward to hearing more. The findings are being used to urge politicians to give all workers in Britain a 32-hour working week. So today, our panellists will be discussing the results of the trial in more detail and looking at how the 4-day working week could work for different types of businesses on a more practical level. So welcome Joe Ryle. He is a campaign director of the 4-day week campaign, as well as media and communications leader for the think tank Autonomy. And he was also a former advisor to Shadow Chancellor John McDonnell MP and a former Labour Party press officer. Welcome, Joe. And welcome also to Rachel Hart. She's an HR consultant from our HR consultancy team at Moore Kingston Smith. And Rachel even designs and implements bespoke HR solutions for clients across a whole different range of sectors and works with companies of all different sizes. So I'm going to be doing a little bit of light Q&A with Joe and Rachel, but please do ask your own questions as well. It's much more fun. It's much more interactive. If you ask questions, please put them in the Q&A function. It's easier to keep track of them there. And then I will try and weave them in as I go through the questions with Joe and Rachel. We are recording today's session, so please do feel free to share it with any peers or anyone who was unable to make it today. And there'll also be a short feedback form that we will be directing you towards at the end of the webinar. So please do fill that in. It does help us to shape future webinars that we hold. So I think we're going to kick off with some questions for you, Joe. So pop your microphone on. So, I mean, tell us a bit about it, Joe. I mean, what did the results of the UK pilot show? Because I think 18 out of 61 is called success, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a phenomenal success overall, which we were very pleased with, but also not surprised by. Quite a lot of people have asked me since, were you surprised by these results? They were, the kind of results do speak for themselves in some way. Very overwhelmingly positive. But it does build off evidence we've seen from across the world, from Iceland, sort of government trials led by the Iceland government. We've seen really big companies in Australia, New Zealand. There was Microsoft in Japan. Have all trialed this 4-day working week with no loss of pay for workers, and it has tended to be a win-win, for both workers and employers. And that was exactly what the results showed in the UK pilot, which, most importantly, was the world's biggest ever pilot of a 4-day working week so far. 61 companies, nearly 3,000 workers, on the one side of it, which is probably perhaps more easy to understand, workers are enjoying life more, their well-being's improved, they're better rested, and we can get into more of those details in a bit. But on the other side of it, productivity and business performance was at least maintained, but in many cases improved. There were many companies that took part in the pilot where their revenues were up, compared to before the pilot, and they're making more money. And obviously there's different metrics for productivity, but overall, the vast majority satisfied their business performance was maintained. So in that scenario, we do think it's a win-win, both workers and employers. So yeah, really, really pleased with the results.
And how did employers generally sort of rate the pilot?
The employers?
Yeah.
So looking at the kind of business performance metrics, some of them are, I should say, lots of the companies that took part were very different. We had on the one hand, like a fish and chip shop took part. There were also kind of financial services companies. So very, very different types of companies in different industries. And obviously they're measuring their, the success and the kind of their organization along very different metrics. We also had a charity taking part. For some, it's as simple as, were profits maintained, profits improved from kind of pre-trial period and then doing the 4-day week. For others, it was more about service delivery. How many services were they delivering before the trial, and how many services were they delivering after? But across all those different sectors, they were all satisfied that business performance was maintained. Job retention massively went up. So the ability, which is obviously important right now in this kind of tight squeeze job market, the ability to hold on to staff, to retain staff, was improved by about 65%. So they've all been really happy with it, and that's why. And this was never expected. The only thing that those companies signed up for was just to trial it, give it a go, see what happens, see where we are at the end of it. But actually, got to the end of it, and almost every company's decided to continue with the 4-day week. Whether making it permanent or continuing with it. So really, really pleased with the results.
Mm. And in terms of the sort of the 61 that took part, were many of those companies that typically would work only a 5-day week? I guess these are more sort of office space, but like I say, fish and chip shop would be open probably more than 5 days a week anyway. Were any sort of your typical 9 to 5:30 Monday to Friday businesses?
Yeah, I'd say most of them were that. And if you look at the kind of stats on this, most people are still working this kind of 9 to 5, 5-day working week model, which I would say, is very outdated. It was a model of work which was designed 100 years ago for, when we had the kind of industrial, agricultural economy. And for some reason, despite the fact the world of work has completely transformed since 100 years ago, we're still wedded to this quite rigid and I would argue outdated model of work. So yeah, most of the companies took part were kind of did used to be a kind of 9 to 5 Monday to Friday, and so that for them it was as simple as kind of shutting the office on a Friday, closing operations on a Friday, and everyone has the same day off. Most people want the 3-day weekend, obviously, but for others, in recognition of the fact that these companies are moving to a 4-day week in an economy which is still dominated by the 5-day week, they found other ways of doing it. So that was looking at rotation of days off. They were kind of being more creative and strategic with their shift and rota patterns to sort of, in some cases, enable that kind of 5-day coverage or 7-day coverage in some cases, but staff only doing the kind of 4 days, 32 hours. So yeah, there's lots of different ways of doing it.
And what were the main benefits, and how were those measured and captured? I mean, were there sort of employee surveys done at all pre and post the campaign?
Yeah, so everything was measured by academics at the University of Cambridge and also Boston College in the US. And so how they did it was they had surveys that went out before the trial began, the kind of baseline level, surveys at the mid part, 3 months, and then surveys again at the end. And at least 1,000 employees took part in those surveys at those kind of 3 parts. And the kind of, yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the bit that is most exciting for me anyway, someone who's passionately believes in a 4-day week. Yeah, I mean, burnout was reduced by 70%. Life satisfaction went up for workers. The ability to manage caring responsibilities, whether that's childcare or other caring responsibilities outside of work, was massively improved. And the ability to have that balance to kind of, cope with all the pressures of life. And I do think in many ways the way that the working week is structured actually does set us up to fail. And I think people found on the 4-day week that balance was much better. People also saying that they have had more of a social life, but it tended to be that most people would spend that extra day kind of catching up on life, admin, rest. Some people were taking part in volunteering in their community, but just overall, just workers that are much happier in themselves and their personal lives, and then they bring that back into the office. They're also then working more effectively, more efficiently, and also more motivated in their job. So yeah, it was really fantastic results for the workers that took part.
And were the workers continuing to get paid the same as they were before?
Yeah, so the overarching principle, which kind of everyone kind of signed up for, was a reduction of 80% of the hours while maintaining 100% pay. And when what they found, obviously there were some concerns around that from some of the companies. Was it going to work? Will they be able to afford it? But they quite quickly found, once they've got a few months into it, workers are just almost immediately better rested. That just brings lots of benefits, and a lot of them also look strategically. So it's not just about working less. Also, for many of them, it's about working differently. And so they were having conversations they'd never had before around, what's our kind of outputs in a standard week? What are we actually trying to achieve, and how can we kind of tweak the way we work to make us more productive, more efficient, more effective, and that kind of helped with the transition to the 4-day week. It made it a lot smoother. They were kind of looking at the entire way in which they work, and we all, in every kind of job that I've done, and others, say this all the time, there's always bits of tasks that we do in our work that perhaps don't really contribute to the overall kind of goal of an organization. So it's trying to find some of those areas to see whether they can be streamlined. I mean, the classic one is like, having a meeting about a meeting about a meeting, it's just like,
yeah.
you cut some of those and you immediately lose, save a couple of hours each week.
I've got quite a few questions coming here, so I'll try and pick them off. Maybe some simple one first. Somebody said, can you just remind us what the length of the trial was and whether it was relatively short, such that the novelty hadn't sort of rubbed off by the end of the trial?
It was a 6-month trial. So it began in June 2022 last year and ended in December, which is usually the kind of standard trial length. We normally find companies want to trial it for 6 months. And we always say try and do it for at least 3 months, but 6 months is probably the best. So yeah, that was the length of it. And then, you're right to say that, we don't know whether this is still going to be working for these companies in another couple of years' time. We don't know that yet, but we do know through our accreditation scheme. So our organization, 4-day week campaign, we accredit companies that have permanently adopted a 4-day week, and we have many companies on there that have been doing it for years and years. So it works for them, and hopefully it's going to keep working into the future. I don't see any reason why it won't.
Yeah, thanks. And there's a couple of sort of linked questions around professional service companies or marketing services companies that effectively sell time, and also where there's an expectation that people will be available five days a week. So somebody sort of said, what advice have you got for professional services companies, and where we're selling time, so if we reduce that time by 20%, then we've got less, but 20% potential less revenue that we can bill, and that's going to have an impact on our ability to bill revenues and make money. So how did businesses deal with that?
Yeah. I mean, firstly, there's many marketing companies that have moved to 4-day weeks already. I would say that's one sector in the professional services sector where it has been shown to be, to be very possible. Secondly, that there is an issue of where companies and organizations are charging on a kind of billable hours rate. And I definitely think that is something that needs to be looked at. We know that there's many consultancy companies we work with that have actually just changed the way they bill. So rather than billing on a per hour basis, they bill on a project basis, because the intention is to deliver the same amount of work to just as good quality or better quality. Because I would say for those industries, actually the creativity that comes from workers being better rested is one really important factor to bear in mind. So there is ways of doing it. I mean, there's also within most companies, obviously can't go into every single contact, every single organization, but there is ways of looking at not my understanding is that for most companies, not every bit of the work that you do is on an hourly rate. So there's other bits that can be looked at. But yeah, it can be more complicated when there is a kind of hourly charging kind of system, and workers are paid that way, or the work comes in that way. And I think we've definitely advised in the past for people to look at that and see whether that can be changed at all.
Yeah, I mean, actually, for a lot of marketing services agencies, getting away from rate card billing and billing by the hour is sort of the dream anyway, and to go to a more sort of perhaps productized way of selling their services. Right, there's a lot of questions here. Somebody else has asked, in terms of like availability to clients, clients expect people to be available 5 days a week. Presumably you just make sure that not everyone's taking Friday off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that works very well for many of the companies. For example, if you take a press office, for example, the kind of media doesn't stop on a Friday. There's still media. So that you kind of, the aim there is to have a rotation of hours. I actually think it would make a lot of sense in somewhere like a press office, where you're dealing with quite a lot of work coming in on the day, but it's not work that sort of transfers over into the next day so much. You actually have a different kind of shift or rota pattern where you're ensuring the 5-day coverage, but staff have different days off in the week. And it will be the case anyway for staff that there'll be certain days that are better to have off for others. So that should work out quite well. Someone I just noticed as well, someone said, can you share the results? I'll make sure before the end of this webinar that I'll post in the chat a link to the report for the pilot.
And somebody's asked as well how charities found the scheme, because obviously if you're operating as sort of a helpline, how you would manage a 4-day working week around that. I guess again it's about rotation, isn't it?
Yeah, so the kind of biggest example was Citizens Advice. I'm sure everyone's heard of, and their office in Gateshead did it. They took part, and actually, Citizens Advice is a national organisation. I know are looking at this more widely. And yeah, for them it was the rotation of hours and days. So it wasn't a kind of rigid. Everyone has Friday off. It was a kind of spread out over the week. Some people had Wednesdays off. Some people had Mondays off. There were a few people. I would say this is less popular, but some people doing kind of 5 much shorter days, so kind of still doing the 30 or 32 hours, but over 5 days rather than 4. That was more rare. Most people want the 3-day weekend, and I do think, just anecdotally from all the companies we've worked with, there does seem to be something transformational about having that 3-day weekend, and I guess everyone knows that feeling from when we have a bank holiday and you get that 3-day weekend. Just imagine that every week and what that does to your well-being. So that definitely is the most popular option.
And somebody's commented about, the productivity to be the same or higher, how are employees squeezing 5 days into 4? And I think you mentioned a little bit about people focusing more on what's important and what's not, and those pieces of work or meetings that they're in that they don't necessarily need to be in. But the point around something need to be sacrificed sort of combined with another question, which is talking about, did people just end up working longer days for those 4 days? So they almost ended up doing as many hours, but just in 4 days rather than 5.
Yeah, I mean, so firstly, productivity always seems to improve just by the simple fact, and sometimes it can be a bit counterintuitive. You're doing less hours. How can you get more work done? I can see the kind of it does sort of seem counterintuitive, but just by simply being better rested, you just do come into work more efficient, more effective, you're more motivated in your job, and that just does bring about productivity gains in and of itself. But yeah, the other side of it is just thinking about how you can work differently, how you can really prioritize. And I think the conversation is naturally moving this way anyway since the COVID pandemic, and it's to one around sort of output rather than kind of hours work. So rather than just sort of bums on seats for the sake of it, what are the actual outputs that we're measuring? What are we trying to achieve in our working week? And being really clear about what those goals are, and kind of, really focusing and orientating all the kind of work around that tends to, those two kind of sides to it tends to make the 4-day week quite easy, really. And it's the same thing that happened 100 years ago. It was all the same. 100 years ago, we moved from a 6-day working week to a 5-day working week. And it was all the same kind of questions, so the economy the economy is going to suffer. How we get the same amount of work done, but actually, it was a win-win. Productivity improved, and workers' lives improved. I think we also have to remember that, and this is more of a kind of campaigning political point, but there has been huge productivity gains over the last few decades. I mean, just take the kind of smartphone and technologies, for example. That we have got more productive over the last few decades, but we haven't reduced hours. And we do think there is an argument that actually we're kind of long overdue an update here.
Were there any businesses that sort of had an agreed day that the business would just shut and close, so that everyone had the same day off, or was it generally more sort of rotation?
For most companies, and that's the easiest and most simple way of doing it, is to just shut the office, shut down operations for one day. Most of them did it that way. And I do think in the future that's where we want to move to. I think I can see it in the future. We have the vision for society where essentially Friday becomes part of the weekend in the same way that Saturday became the weekend 100 years ago. I think that's the natural evolution in the way that we work over time, but we're not quite there yet. And we've said we want to see the 4-day week become the normal way of working by the end of this decade. So in the meantime, it's got to be flexible to allow for companies to implement it in a way that suits them, but also in a way that recognizes most people are still doing a 5-day working week.
Yeah. It's a couple of sector specific. So somebody's asked, has there been any trials in the education sector? Was anyone involved?
There was actually a school that took part. There was a school that took part as part of a bigger kind of private organisation, and I believe it went very well there. I think it was a special needs school. I don't have all the details of that because I don't think we managed to get all the details from them. They weren't included in the report, their case study, but I know that it worked very well and they've kept with it. So there's a few examples starting to look. I think people are starting to think about schools, because we think about burnout, stress, overwork. It's some of the key characteristics of the British workplace that the 4-day week is trying to tackle. If you think of an industry where that is rife, I mean, it is teaching and education as well as probably NHS. And so, we do want this to apply for all workers in the long run. And interestingly, in the USA and America, actually, there's thousands of schools that have moved to 4-day working weeks since the COVID pandemic. largely as the way to they were sort of struggling to hold on to teachers, which is similar here. You know, teachers leave the profession quite quickly. There's definitely more experimentation needed there. There are some schools that have already tried out 4.5-day weeks. And then the first local authorities moved to a 4-day week this year as well, just trialing it. So I think we will start to see more experimentation around education and schools, because obviously, unless you're doing this in a kind of, you know, the whole economy and government and trade unions are all kind of bought in, then it's quite hard to see how, for example, you know, kids would get a 4-day week at schools without the parents getting a 4-day week as well. So it is trickier.
And somebody else has asked about manufacturing. Were there any manufacturing companies in the trial, and did any of those adopt the practice?
Yeah, there were 3 or 4 manufacturing companies. There was a brewery in North London that took part. And again, I think, you know, for them especially, the focus was really on, you know, really examining the way in which people are working. How can they kind of speed up and improve their you know, their production line? And you know, we have to say as well that, you know, automation and new technology is helping with that anyway. And so there is an argument that, you know, as we get more and more automated, more new technology, that should free up workers to have more free time, because that is improving productivity. So there were some who looked at ways they can use kind of new almost tools like Slack as well. You know, like there were some companies just using new kind of ways of communicating within an organization to sort of improve things. But yeah, there's, I know in the North London brewery, that's worked very well. They're keeping it. And also, you know, for manufacturing companies, it's not all production line work. There are people always in back offices as well. So it's looking at the whole way in which you work to make it possible. So yeah, that was a real success at that brewery in North London.
Okay, that's great. Somebody's asked about holidays. How does this work with holidays? And because, you know, there's lots of holiday entitlement and there's lots of bank holidays, and this just could add up to too many days a year not working.
It's great to have so many questions. Luckily, it's questions I've answered before. So on the holiday leave, most people tend to either leave it as it is because they say, you know, look, the business is achieving just as well as, you know, it's achieving what it wants to achieve just as well as it was before, if not better. So let's just leave the same amount of holiday. Others would reduce holiday leave by 20%, which is, you know, which overall is seen as fair because you're overall getting a massive uptake. You know, you're getting 1 extra day off every single week. So a 20% reduction in annual leave, you know, is still overall massively beneficial for the workers. So that is the kind of 2 approaches there. Bank holidays, again, it tends to be different approaches. Some will allow people to have 3-day weeks if the bank holiday doesn't align with the day that you normally have off. Others will say, actually, well, the bank holiday will become the day off that week, so there's only 1 day off, so you just keep a 4-day week. Others will maybe just give people, add bank holidays to annual leave and give people the option. So there's different ways of doing that. And yeah, I wouldn't want to advise what was best because we kind of leave that up to people to decide.
And part-time employees, did that create a challenge?
Yeah, I would say it's really important. I'm really glad that question's been asked, because I would say that tends to be one of the biggest challenges, because they're, you know, of course, part-time workers want to be included in this in some way. And in not all cases has that been possible. But for the vast majority of companies we've worked with, you know, there's hundreds of 4-day week companies that are accredited. There's the 61, the pilot. They tend to try and include part-time workers in some way. That could be done in different ways. One way, for example, could be to reduce their hours as well. The second one could be to increase their pay in recognition of the fact that other people are, you know, effectively getting a kind of per hour pay rise. The third one is to kind of offer more kind of annual leave or holiday pay benefits, or some combination of that. So there's different ways of doing it. We would usually recommend having those conversations with part-time workers to see what's going to suit them. But yeah, that was some of the different ways that people did it.
There are a few related questions here around whether people were really only working a 4-day week, and how the whole sort of working from home practice might make it more difficult to track that. So, you know, were they actually doing some work on the 5th day, or maybe were they actually working if they were unwell? And another sort of related one with the cost of living crisis, what, you know, I don't know how far you would be able to track this or tracked it, but whether people were tempted to use that 5th day to get a second job to bring extra money in. So actually they were still working 5 days a week.
Yeah, so again, there were a handful of these examples, which, you know, we'd always expect. I would say it was quite rare, but I think definitely more towards the beginning stage of that 6-month trial, there were more cases of people sort of struggling to just, you know, with any kind of big change to the workplace, it's going to take some time to adjust and adapt. As we sort of kind of moved to remote working, it wasn't really seamless the first few months. It took a while to adapt. And I think, yeah, for that first month or two, there were more stories of, actually, I've had to do a couple of hours on a Friday. And, that can be worse when it's the kind of boss's managerial level, because that sets a bad example to the rest of the staff. But I think by the end of the 6-month trial, people have gotten used to it, and that was happening much, much less. And part of this is also about confronting our addiction to work, which is difficult, which is challenging, which is, goes back decades. The UK works on the longest working hours in Europe, also while having one of the least productive economies. So, that would suggest that all these long hours we put in isn't producing very good results. So that that is a difficult thing to confront, and that can take a few months, that can take longer. So there's some cases of that. There were a few cases of, and I know that was challenging for one organisation, where there were some staff who were doing an extra bit of work on the Friday, which obviously in many respects defeats the point of a 4-day week in terms of better well-being, having more time to yourself. And I know there were some challenging conversations there, but it happened to be fairly rare. Most people bought into the idea of, and I think there was one company where they actually did put it in the contract that, people couldn't go and take up extra work on that day off. So different ways of doing it, but you'd always expect some, there's always going to be a few handful of cases. There's always one person as well who just absolutely just loves working all the time, which I always find funny. There's always someone who's like, I just want to work all the time. And I think the way they got around that was by just saying, well, look, we're only going to pay you the same as those doing 4 days. It's up to you. If you want to come in and do another day, you can do that, but we're not going to stop you. But, it's not kind of encouraged.
Yeah. Interesting question here. Was there any difference in the findings between managers and senior leaders and other more junior workers in terms of how they dealt with it, how easy it was to...
Yeah, nothing that showed up in the data. I mean, I think anecdotally, because the University of Cambridge did loads of interviews at kind of employee level and managerial level, and kind of CEOs and senior managers. And I know that there were definitely a few senior managers who were sort of feeling like they had more responsibility. I know there was a few at the beginning who were sort of struggling to switch off on that day off, which I think, in some ways sets a bad example. And I know there's other laws being discussed right now across Europe around a kind of right to disconnect. So like when you're actually off, there being a kind of legal right not to be contacted by your kind of work. So that's one thing that I know many countries, France, Portugal, have been exploring. So maybe that is part of the solution as well. But nothing that showed up significantly in the data. Most, I guess for most of those companies, there was some level of buy-in before they started. And so that probably did come from the kind of managerial level. So that, these were the pioneering companies, they were up for experimenting with it. So maybe that would be tricky, but yeah.
So one more question from the audience, then I'll come in with my last question, then we'll move over to Rachel. So did the research highlight what the sort of the key improved working practice improvements were that resulted in employees fitting the 5 sort of working days into 4? And did this vary by company or by industry? And what were the common themes? I mean, maybe this is in the report that we can share with people.
Yeah, I'll send around the report afterwards. I mean, I think the key, this comes up a lot, is like, I think a lot of the people that were involved in the kind of implementation of this, whether it's kind of at sort of senior HR level or managerial level, I think they did say that it was kind of the working differently was a big part of it. It wasn't just about kind of just reducing hours and just doing exactly the same, working exactly the same way they have before. This kind of working differently and looking at all the kind of working patterns was, I think was really beneficial for those organizations. We've worked with many companies that have actually not even gone on to do the 4-day week, but found the idea of even thinking about it really useful for looking at how you can improve the way in which people work. And also, a lot of this does improve kind of team and staff cohesion as well, like the kind of spirit. But there was a lot of talk about the spirit at work being a lot better, people being much more happier, and having conversations they'd never had before. So that was the one side of it. But it was very, very different in terms of the, different industries and what they were trying to achieve. It's completely different set of challenges for a charity compared to a fish and chip shop, so it's quite hard to quantify that.
Super. And there's some people I think have sort of said it'd be great to be put in touch with some of the other businesses that have found the pilot successful, in terms, I guess, of them potentially trialing it themselves. So we'll try and make that happen where we can. So what comes next, Joe, for the 4-day week campaign? What's the next steps?
What comes next? So we've just launched a national rollout program, which I'll post again in the chat after this, which is, we're basically aiming for kind of a much wider rollout across the private sector this year. And this kind of rollout program is there to support companies on their journey. That starts next month. The second part of it is looking at, we've got a general election coming up next year, and it's kind of what sort of policies can we get at a government level to start, that will enable this transition. I think we're at the very beginning of society moving to a 4-day working week. If you look at 100 years ago, we moved from a 6-day week to a 5-day week. It did take about a decade, in some cases 2 decades, for the kind of economy to shift. I think we're at the very beginning of that transition. So we're definitely going to be kind of campaigning at the next election, with all political parties for policies that are going to help to enable that transition. And the third part of it is, trade union movement as well. The weekend was won by the trade unions. They led that campaign 100 years ago. We think there's a role to play, as well as a role to play. We think we need business leaders, government, trade union leaders to make this a reality. It's that combination, working together, that's going to make this a reality for most people. But in the meantime, we just want to keep seeing the rollout spreading, because we have found that the more companies that do it, the more that takes away some of the fear around it and does create a bit of a domino effect. The more companies in each industry which do it, it makes it harder for others to ignore as well. So yeah, I'll post some of those details in the chat now.
No, that's super interesting, Joe. Thanks for talking about that. I think it'd be really interesting to see how this all pans out, and I would definitely vote, definitely be voting for a 4-day week. So Rachel, I mean, is this something that employers should be considering as part of their sort of whole employee attraction and retention strategies?
We've just heard some amazing benefits from Joe from the 4-day working week. We've heard how employees, they were more engaged, they are better rested, there was no drop in productivity, and in some cases there was an increase in business turnover as well. So there are some amazing facts and figures that have come out from it, and that would undoubtedly in some cases attract people to the business and retain staff to it, especially I suppose if you're one of those early adopters as a business to actually implement this scheme. It's different, people are very excited about it, it's very well spoken about at the moment, and that would be attractive. I suppose what we need to think as well, though, is that attraction and retention is more than just this at the moment. There are companies who have amazing attraction and retention policies in place at the moment that are very effective, that don't offer the 4-day working week, and that the 4-day working week may not work for all companies. And it doesn't mean that they can't have really good people strategies in place as well. So I think the key thing for now is this is the time to start challenging it, to start questioning, how do we work? And why do we work? Why do we currently do a 5-day working week? Does that work for our business? Could a 4-day working week work? Could a reduction in hours work? Because unless businesses start to question it, then obviously they might not have the answers to it when the employees undoubtedly start asking them why they can't trial a 4-day working week. So I think it's about having those high-level conversations for now and seeing if it's going to work, whether it will work for business. And yes, if they do implement it as part of people's strategies, then there could be some real benefits if they do.
Mm-hmm. And what about the gender sort of disparities and gender pay gap? Could it help with that, do you think?
I think that question could probably warrant a webinar all in itself, but it's a really interesting one, because we know that at the moment women are still disproportionately affected by childcare needs. And actually a recent government study showed that 38% of working women work part-time versus 14% of working men who work part-time. And that the gender pay gap is affected significantly, reportedly, when a woman has her first child. So we know that that is a big impact there. So whilst it's part of a much wider discussion, I suppose a high level answer to that is potentially if you start to offer 4-day working weeks and actually 1 day of childcare is helped with that. And not only that, but if it becomes more widespread and say 2 people in a relationship actually both have a 4-day working week, then potentially that brings more balance as well. So potentially, yes, probably part of a much wider interesting discussion though.
Yeah, definitely. So if employers are interested in trialing this in their own company, what are sort of the practical things that they need to consider? And again, I'm sure that list is quite long, but
yeah, probably quite long. But to try and hit the main ones, so I think the first thing would be to remember that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. every company is different and the approach to it needs to be different to make it work. So for example, Joe was talking about how you actually implement it. Do you give everyone the same day off? Do you rota it? Is there a way that actually you could shorten 5-day weeks to get to the right amount of hours that you're looking for? I know it's obviously advertised as the 4-day week, but actually one of the main premises is 80% of the hours. So are there other ways that you could achieve that which would work better for your business? And just thinking about the logistics of it in terms of having people available, if people are on a rota scheme, if you need to schedule meetings in with people. Are there times that are, core times or core days if people are on a different rota? It's just all the logistics to try and make sure that that is effective and make sure that's tailored to your business to get that to work. And the other considerations are obviously in terms of making sure that you act legally. It's really easy to get excited about the 4-day working week, but actually we need to remember that any change in working hours is still a change of contract. Whether temporary or not, that's still a change of contract. So an employer can't just change working hours without either gaining consent or consulting with employees. They do need to consider legal implications of how they're approaching this. Alongside that, employers need to start thinking about whether they need to put in temporary policies in place to really explain how they're going to approach it, how it's going to work, and make sure in those policies it explains that it's a temporary measure if it's a trial. And the other thing that's already been touched on by Joe actually, but trying to ensure that you act fairly. So making sure that there aren't groups of employees that are treated as a detriment. One example could be part-time. So there are legal protections for part-time workers, and you need to make sure that you consider them in this. How will you approach that, and have those conversations as well, just so that there's not one group that actually is affected, is treated to a detriment.
But also you said there, you can't just change everyone's working hours without going through some sort of process. But if it isn't working, if you do the 4-day week trial and you come to the end of 6 months and it isn't working, and obviously there weren't many that canned it straight away in the trial, but there were a few that did, can you just revert back? And maybe Joe also maybe sort of chime in with those that did revert back, how did that go down with employees?
Yeah, so you can revert back as long as you have done everything properly with the preparation and the communication at the start. If you have launched policies that are temporary policies that explain that this is a temporary alteration, it is a trial, it is dependent on certain measures, and that communication is there and you've got the legal right to. So if you did an amendment to a contract, it would need to be phrased as a temporary amendment to contract. It's all about trying to ensure that communication and the paperwork is there and effective. But as long as you have that, then yes, you would be able to revert back if the trial didn't work. Again, with that though, if it doesn't work, then trying to mitigate, I suppose, any drop in engagement levels, because I think if you just reverted back and actually that could really hit engagement in a negative way. So I think within the trial, what you would need to do is trying to ensure that actually the communication through it is effective, to ensure that people really know whether it's working throughout the trial and whether there's anything that you can do to change it within that, and what the company actually needs to see to make that a success, so that everyone is on the same page, everyone understands how they can do it. But even again, after that, if it's not successful, there may still be other learning outcomes that come from it. Maybe there is a different approach you can take with the way of working in a different way. It didn't work that way, but actually you've learnt different approaches to productivity that would still help the organisation after the trial.
Yeah, and I can jump in. I mean, it is, I think it's very rare that a company goes back from a 5-day working week to a 4-day working week. There was one company who was split in two, and I had it was quite a funny phone call, but it was a phone call with one of half of the company maintained the 4-day week and the other half went back to a 5-day working week. And it was a call on the phone to a disgruntled employee who was stuck at the 5-day week company. And, so there was, that did happen, but it was only three of the companies that kind of paused for now. And I know for all of those, they were saying that we're hoping to revisit this again later this year, but I think that 2 of them were struggling to recruit. They didn't have enough staff, and so that did make it a lot more difficult. I mean, obviously the 4-day week, it has been shown to massively help with that. It's one of the best things that you can offer in terms of job retention and recruitment. But obviously we wouldn't expect those gains to be made until you kind of decide to make it permanent, because obviously you're probably not going to join a new organization who would who are just doing it for 6 months. You want to know that's going to be a kind of permanent benefit. So yeah, that it does happen, but it's very rare.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I mean, in terms of, what can employers do to sort of improve the chance of the success of a 4-day week trial if they're going to do it? Because presumably if you're trialing it, you're hoping that it's going to work and that it's going to become long term.
Absolutely. And I think with that, if you focus on the word trial to start with, utilize that trial as best as you can to make sure it works. I said that within it, say, for example, you do a 6-month trial, revisiting things, having dates put in to review and figure out whether it is working and whether there's anything you can tweak and change to make sure it works. Because otherwise, if you do the 6 month, it doesn't work at the end, but actually you find you could have done something differently, then you've not done everything you could have done to try and ensure that worked towards the end. The other key thing I would say is to ensure that you measure success as well as you can. That is obviously easier in some businesses or in some teams than other teams. But unless you know what is success for your company, then how will you know? So I think in terms of the initial conversations, each company needs to decide what will we need to see to make this a success for us. Are there things that we could measure? As a certain teams may have productivity statistics that they can use already, other teams may not have those statistics. Is there another way that we can measure the productivity of certain teams? Is there a way that we can measure staff engagement levels? So Joe mentioned staff surveys. So could you do a staff survey at the start, in the middle, at the end to measure it? And potentially with suggestions as well. So you can use those suggestions and actually, again, help to amend the trial if required. There are other ways within the trial that some people have noted that their sickness levels decrease. So could you measure your sickness levels? Or even at a more granular level, say, for example, an employer offers an EAP scheme. Some EAP schemes give overviews of how that scheme has been used in terms of what people have run the EAP scheme for. So have, for example, the number of calls gone down, have the types of calls changed, anything that you can use really to help build that big picture of how that's successful. If you are client facing or customer facing, do you have reviews that are left for you? Do you use customer NPS scores? Anything basically. And again, every company will be different, but I suppose each company almost needs to build that package of metrics that they are going to use to measure the success. And that's really critical because you need to know whether that's been successful for you. And then the last thing I'd say is if you are still really keen to do it, but you're still unsure, then actually you can use there's a lot of external support that is available to you. There's a lot of resources that obviously the 4-day week campaign have launched. And again, we work with clients and we support clients too. So if people are in need of extra support, then people can reach out and speak to people and get some advice on it as well.
I'm going to squeeze one last sort of question comment in that have come from a couple of people. Somebody said it feels like you could be quite disruptive and maybe just do the 4-day working week for 3 months of the year during the summer. I thought that was quite a neat idea. And somebody else has said that in their company, what they do to help stress levels and getting work done is no meetings, no calls and no emails on a Friday, which I think is super interesting. And they said it's really worked for them and given the people the freedom to actually get the work done on a Friday and switch off for a bit. Sort of, not quite going to a 4-day working week, but some sort of halfway house to sort of help manage people's mental health, I suppose, during the working week. I don't know, Joe, you got any comments on that at all? I thought that was quite a good suggestion, actually.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds good. I mean, there was definitely a few companies that experimented with sort of traffic light. They had a kind of like traffic light system where they had stuff on their desk where it was kind of red if they were kind of busy answering emails and green for like time when they could speak with other people. So I think that's definitely part of the solution to enabling the move to a 4-day week is different ways in which we can street look, a lot of us spend too much time on emails, and it's actually like but emails is just only one part of the job. What's the other bits? And so I think I did respond to one of the questions there. I think there's also could also take a much more gradual approach, which is kind of what Rachel was hinting at. Perhaps a 4.5-day week, you start with that. Maybe you do a 9-day fortnight and you kind of gradually, rather than kind of just like suddenly moving to 4-day week, you kind of gradually reduce hours. and then, you know, and I think there was one company we worked with who did that on the pilot. They did it their own way, and they actually reduced like an hour each week, and it was just like very gradual. And so just they didn't even really notice by the time they got down to 4 days versus 2 hours. They just, you know, very gradually got used to it. So I think, you know, we welcome any reduction in hours. We would welcome.
Yes, definitely. Well, thank you so much, both of you. That is all super interesting stuff, and maybe we'll rerun this in 6 months' time and see how the rest of the trialists who've continued are getting on. So thank you everyone for joining us this morning. We'll close now. Just to let you know, the next webinar is in inspector calls, what employers need to know in advance of tax related compliance checks, and that's on the 27th of April. So hopefully we'll see lots of you there. So other than that, cheerio for now. Don't forget to fill in the feedback form, and enjoy the rest of your sunny day. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.